Hello there, and welcome back to Autistic Radio. Every Sunday, we make a live broadcast. It's based on a Facebook page where our secretary of the Autistic Association, the charity that we have together as autistic people, he puts together inspiring and difficult posts that he collects from around the internet. These posts are not collaborations from the people, but they are put out there in the public domain on Facebook, and we comment on them. The comments that we make on them are our own personal ideas. They may stray from the original idea of the comment to inspire us to talk about other things. If it happens to be that one of your comments is taken, please understand that we are not trying to cause you a problem or criticise in any way. We're actually celebrating what you've put out there, and we're amplifying what you've put out there, bringing it to a bigger audience. It's difficult in the world of autism to have a concerted effort to bring together the whole of our community with one voice, because we all have different voices. However, if there's something that we have said in this space that you feel needs addressing, then contact us and we will do our very best to address your concerns. news@autisticradio.com. This is where we put the information about what we're doing here at Autistic Radio. And one of the things that we are doing is controversial for the very community that we're talking about, because we are cooperating to have a conversation with people who come from the idea of ABA and people who come from the idea of PBS. We have already presented at the annual conference down in London for the ABA organisation here in the UK, and shortly we will be also presenting at the main PBS conference here in the UK. If you are an advocate who has a strong opinion about either of those acronyms or behaviourism in general, then we will make your voice heard too. Just because we are deciding it's necessary to have a conversation does not mean we are partisan. It's absolutely possible for you, if you say ban ABA, to come and speak with us and put your voice out here on Autistic Radio. In fact, we want that. We want to hear what the objections are so that we can put it directly to the people. Because we don't put out the message simply to ban ABA here, though maybe some of our individual members might. Our general policy here is to have a conversation, because we feel, generally as a group, that if we have a conversation, we might be able to change something. So come and speak with us and let us amplify your voice, whatever that voice is. Does that feel like a reasonable thing to say and announce out there to the people who will listen to this? Does anybody else wish to comment at the meeting here?
I find it very fair, particularly because of behaviourism and because of the controversy and the sensitive nature of the topic and the background of many in that particular field. But what I like, what you're doing and what we're doing as a whole organisation, charity, is that we're doing it the most fairest way possible so that everyone has their say on the matter and has the opportunity to ask genuine questions and raise concerns, because it's totally understandable why people feel the way they do and why people just want to just outline blank ban things like this altogether. I just feel it's a fairer way to have a discussion, to see what it's all about and see if it's a threat that we think it is, or is it more open and are they more open to more positive change and understanding of what autism is. So I back it.
Okay, so you're backing the conversation, you're not backing ABA.
No, I'm backing the conversation. I
Yeah.
think to back ABA is a bit too early and a bit too strong at this particular time.
I think it's unlikely that any of us will ever back ABA as it has been. It may be that we can find parts of it that are valuable. It's too early, isn't it? One thing that has interested me in preparation for this next presentation at the PBS conference, there was a meeting, and at that meeting there was a person who I won't identify yet, who will be giving a talk directly in front of me, and their experience as they described it was somebody who had been traumatized by ABA, and who was now, through their own research and through their own advocacy, someone who was out there and being included to try and change and try and make positive changes. An autistic person. And I obviously invited that person to come and speak with us, and that is definitely one of the voices, somebody who's actually received the trauma from ABA, as it has been in the past, to come and speak with us and amplify it through Autistic Radio. It's interesting also to remind that they are actually speaking at that conference as well, and have been for a while. So some might say, well, they haven't got very far, but we don't know that. We don't have all the information. Bit serious as a meeting today. Let's join the normal conversation that we have, Harry, and ask you to take the microphone away from me and introduce the 555 discussions.
No problem, Julian. Look forward to doing so. So good evening, everyone. This is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 13th of April, 2025. And this is the podcast where we discuss and share Facebook posts and the subjects and topics that are based on them and the information that's based on them. And we just have a general talk as a starting point in each post. And the first post this evening is from the Actually Autistic Coach, who's a personal coach who empowers my fellow autistic people by working to uncover and unmask, revealing our best selves. And what they've shared is the following. You weren't easygoing. You were masking discomfort. You weren't good at going with the flow. You abandoned your needs to keep the peace and stay safe. You weren't chill. You were dissociating. They saw flexibility. You felt erased. That wasn't kindness. It was survival. What's other people's thoughts?
It feels like a poetic call to arms, and I really appreciate reading something like that. We are often convinced by the majority population that it's our problem. It's something we have to deal with. We are in deficit. But if you look at every line in that poem, it uplifts you. It puts the lie to it, and I appreciate it.
I'm just having a little look at the Autistic Coach's website, and they do free monthly discussion and affirmation groups. The subject sounds really interesting as well. There's an autistic Jewish community discussion. There's queer and autistic 20 and 30 something discussions, over 40s. So sounds like quite a rich space. And everything in that poem just like I was like very recognizable. And I'm really grateful quite a lot of the time for the knowledge and the awareness that I've come to around about autism and understanding myself, because it really does, it has made life a lot better. And yeah, like not being some sort of checked out, dissociative, compliant, like shell of a person anymore. It's great.
Although it's been some time, we've shared a couple of things from the actual autistic. Say again. Even though it's been some time, we've shared a few things from the actual autistic coach, and it's usually things providing information about the courses and things you were talking about there, Nicola, and kind of inspirational kind of poems or quotes like these, kind of reminders to self, and sometimes reading it out for others to understand, because there's a lot of misunderstanding around autism, especially in school and places where it's kind of based by authority and based on a certain way of doing things, and if you don't do it the so-called normal way, you're looked upon as a right pain, a right clog in the wheel, which causes much distress for everyone else. So these sort of things is very inspirational, even just to look at, even just to read over, because it just reminds you that understanding is still required, not just out with, but self-understanding as well, because sometimes you get so caught up in emotions and frustration, sometimes you even forget about this sort of thing yourself.
It's a bit like a blues, isn't it? You can sing a sad song and it makes you feel better.
Yeah, many people do. Yeah, absolutely.
See how the post was talking about, being your best self. It just seems like surely that's a world that is good for us all to live in when people are moving towards their best self. Like I think at times where like I've had loads of unmet needs and not been able to kind of self-actualize at all, and I don't think that you put good stuff out into the world like that. I don't think that you can make a great contribution when you're the opposite of your best self. And just in terms of like it creates more suffering, I think. So it seems important that we've got, and I think this comes back to the conversation we had earlier. We're talking about like kind of current politics, just this idea that like it's the right to kind of get to be your best self surely is something that we would want for everyone.
maybe even just to be a self rather than the best self. I understand what people mean when they talk about a best self. It's probably the free self, you know, the one that isn't restrained by judgment and conditions. But I sometimes think like our best option is to realize, in the words of another song, we are the world.
Yeah, I think my best self in like actually autistic coach thing, when I was looking at the site, they were talking about, we had that post talking about being able to, not stand on your own kind of power and things like that, or just to be well. And I don't mean it in some absolutist kind of like there is this distillation of this best self. Just more that you're not in survival mode all the time. Like I feel like there's a different, like if you're living in survival mode, there's no way you're able to kind of be like, your frontal lobes aren't engaged in the same way they are when you are able to kind of be calm enough to learn new stuff and to be able to connect with other people. So I guess it's rather than the extreme of this perfected human, it's not. It's like, people who are wanting to be, I want to live in a world where like I'm not surrounded and I'm not like in survival mode. Like I want to be surrounded by other people who are thriving and healthy, and I want to be able to kind of be well.
Yeah, there's a lot in that connected to personal desires and stuff, and whether they are our own or whether they are kind of forged in us. Even when things are really bad, the world is speaking to us, I believe, saying, here's a way, Maybe very difficult to find that way, but that's, for me, peace, is accepting that.
I feel that today, I'm glad to say that I feel that I'm my best self. But it's taken a long time for that to happen. But it's good to know that it's possible, with enough help, with enough determination, with enough confidence that comes about. It's good to know that that can happen because, the teenage years was not very nice, and that was before I was diagnosed. I'm very fortunate to be diagnosed, identified, whatever you want to call it, at 17, because it was just before young adulthood or just adulthood. But it felt that it missed a kind of crucial part in schooling, but you can't have it always. And there's a lot of kind of frustration. What would it be like if I'd been diagnosed before then? Would it have been different? But what I was saying to myself, it might not have been that different at that time. A wee bit different, probably not too much because it was that early on in terms of the autism sort of recognition and understanding of what autism actually is. But all the things that I've been involved in my adult life, autistic things and things that are they're out basically to do the benefit of other people in the community. People, like mental health services years ago when I was involved in Mental Health Forum, and today we're involved in, the Unite Community Branch, Unite Union, to help people that, that are out of work and are in precarious work and helping the campaigning in terms of money and politics and that sort of thing, campaigns, in terms of support, in terms of a lot of different things, that solidarity stuff that they call it, as well as things like Tenants Rights Association, where you're helping kind of housing and community issues, and you're doing that for the greater good. And I just feel that being involved in all that, and as it said about being autistic, it's always looking to do, not all of it, but in my experience, it's always looking for some sort of justice for people. because of the unfairness of the way life can be. And I think that's helped me become the individual I've become today, that I recognise and I appreciate that I am. Have the flaws and all that, and I don't want to be the perfect person anyway. I mean, I don't know what I would be anyway, but I wouldn't want to be that. Although that might be a strange thing to say, because our flaws, whatever you want to call them, makes us human. It makes us identifiable to people who may be in need and who you can support, depending on what situation you're in.
Well said, Harry.
I'm looking forward to that coming out in the air bit, Harry.
The next post is from Neurodivergent Insights, an education page, and it says a reflection of a neurodivergent clinician. And what they're talking about is what they call in search of sensory Goldilocks. And what the text is, the supporting text says, what it says is, last year I had an experience, and the moment I had it, it felt very familiar. I realised I was both under and overstimulated. It brought me right back to those early years in school and church, when I started to crawl out of my skin from the boredom, while also feeling utterly overwhelmed by the sights, sounds, smells, and bodies all around me. These days I think of it as our Goldilocks zone for focus and general feeling okayness. Too much stimulation and our brains can't settle. Too little and we start restlessly reaching for more stimulus. Cue the scroll spiral on social media. As an ADHDer, finding just the right zone can feel elusive. But here's the thing, feeling grounded, or even just able to engage with what's in front of us, often depends on our environment matching the kind of stimulation we need for that task. If something feels painfully boring or wildly overwhelming, it's worth pausing to check in. What's happening with your stimulus window? Where can I bump up the stimulus? Where can I bump it down? There may not be a one-size-fits-all formula, but there are ways to better understand your own sensory profile and actually work with it and not against it. We created a tool to help with that, a stimulus check-in, with reflective questions and ideas on how to adjust your stimulation in real time. It's now available to Substack subscribers, peer tiers, along with something new I'm trying. Historically, video has been a hard medium for me. Something about the permanence, the performance being perceived, but behind the small intentional community I'm growing over on Substack, I'm experimenting with it in a way that feels bearable. Each Friday, I'm sharing 10 to 20-minute videos where I offer reflections, half-baked thoughts, and frameworks I'm currently playing with. You'll get access to those to Field Notes Friday videos and downloadable PDF this month when you join as a paid subscriber. So what's people's thoughts on that particular post regarding the stimulus? And have you experienced such a thing that's been shared?
Sensory processing's like a big part of my struggles, and as a parent I've really had to learn to deal with it, to look after myself, because it was the hardest part of parenting to cope with before I allowed myself the accommodations that I needed. I need to wear earplugs fairly often around my family, and I can still hear them if they need me. It just takes the edge off their like the voices, and I find that I'm like so much more. Like, I cope so much better when I do that, and I think I can't remember. I remember the first time I did it. I put earplugs in around the kids and stuff when I was in the car, and it was just like the most massive relief. I think I nearly cried because at the time I didn't quite know. I hadn't had my diagnosis, and so I wasn't taking my sensory needs as seriously. I kept on kind of like gaslighting myself, but now it's so much better, and like I'm really careful about smells and stuff as well. I realised how much that affected me too. And life's just like a whole lot better, and I don't have as much physical pain anymore from that. And then, like they were saying about the Goldilocks thing, I think I've really learned that there's times when I need to give myself like these nice sensory experiences, like drinking like fizzy water, and like letting myself eat the foods that make me feel good, and seeking out like certain movements and things that make me feel better too. Because I can get really understimulated when I'm responsible for the kids. I'm not able to go and do something that I want. I'm having to like hold on and just like be there for them. And so I found that I've been able to regulate more through that restrictive kind of reality. Yeah.
What Nicola's just said so wonderfully there, it makes me think about why we cannot be like that anyway. I mean, I probably do know why we can't be like that. I've lived that life. I was conditioned. I was reacted to when I was being myself. And so I adopted some other self, which is the one being expressed in the comments here. So that's what I would say about what Nicola just said there.
It's not something I've really thought about, although I've experienced it. The kind of stimulation, the sensory sort of sensitivity always comes into play when I read things like this, is that the overbearing of senses like smells, noises, sound, noises as sounds, sights, bright light stuff. I just find that sometimes I don't want to go out the house, and sometimes I put myself going out if I wanted to do something. It's like I can't really deal with all the kind of senses outside today, because I live in a housing estate and other people live around me, and people are just busy doing their own thing. And there's people with loud cars and zooming up and down, and they're not doing any harm as such. It's just like the noise goes right through you. And if it's a busy day, people are all out talking away, and it's just all this sort of noise. Although, and you sit and listen to it at home, it's a pleasant noise. You're hearing happiness, you're hearing, children, hearing the sound of children playing and being happy sounds fantastic. And you can smell, the cut grass and stuff off summer and stuff. It's good when you're from a distance. But to be part of it sometimes is just a bit overbearing. Even just to walk through, and it's like I'm kind of walking fast through just to get away from it. And it just seems, that's always a thing I think about when I'm about to leave the house, even if it's just going down to mum and dad's house, who just live kind of 5 minutes away from me. That's my thought on it.
This is a bit strange for me, because in so many ways, for such a long time, I have had quite a lot of control over my environment. I moved a long time ago out into the countryside, into a big rambling house with its own garden space for going and being in trees. I've had the ability to control the stimulus in my life, work when I want to work and not. I can access what people are saying here on the basis that I am autistic and I have experienced the things. But the reason I'm saying this is because my autistic experience is a full, happy life. And it's the environment that I'm in that enables that. And the majority of autistic people are unable to access that luxury, that places where they can go away from stimulus, places where they can heal in nature, getting away from the constant babble of other people and the stuff going on in the street. And what I want to say is that autism itself is not the disability. It's how the rest of society is for us. You can be a perfectly healthy autistic people under the right conditions, but the right conditions are seldom there for people.
I'm with you on that, Jules, about environment.
Sorry, Nicola, you want to speak?
I've had like second thoughts and third thoughts and fourth thoughts and fifth thoughts since I had that first thought.
Multiple thoughts. This is what we're all about. Fluidity.
Yeah, but when I get those thoughts, I just go, oh, well, no point saying anything.
We're all waiting for you to say these things, Nicola.
No, but like, there's nothing. It's like there's nothing to share. Like it was almost like I thought, and then I answered my thought and thought no, and then I thought another thought, and then I can't remember what all those thoughts were because they amounted to nothing.
Yeah, I recognise that in my own experience of thinking.
That in itself is a process, a creative process. It's worth sometimes just maybe going back over it in your head and noting down how it flowed.
I think I was going to say, well, sometimes I get really, really overstimulated by the sun. And like, I know I could just like, if I'm wealthy, I can just have loads of different cool sunglasses, but having sunglasses on my face is quite overstimulating too. So there's like, I think mostly, yeah, like society is disabling. But I don't know. And then I was really interested when hearing you all share about the post as well, because I'd heard before that the sensitivity seemed to be more common in women, female women with autism rather than, and it's not a trait that was added to the diagnostic criteria until quite recently too. So I'm wondering if that's perhaps why you're like, oh, well, I can mostly just like accommodate myself. And I'm like, yeah, like I find the sensory stuff can feel really, really debilitating. And yeah, I can see the wealth argument, but yeah, I'm not sure. So I had all those thoughts and then I thought, I don't really know. And it seems a lot to sort of put out there that, because it's just based on a lot of presumptions in my head.
I think what you say about the male-female thing is interesting because whenever we talk about autism, we also have to talk about the imbalance in our society and the acceptance of a level of misogynism in our society. And it affects everything to do with how autistic females have been treated. When you say it wasn't put in, the sensitivity wasn't put into the criteria until it was brought to the attention through the female experience, I think that's really telling on what masking men have been doing. I would say that the sensitivity is very noticeable in all of the autistic people that I've come across, but the men, because of society's expectations, are much more likely to follow the bottle it up, push it down, destructive way of dealing with it. And that's why, even as very, very young children, that control yourself and is so prevalent amongst males. It's the way males are treated differently to females. It's so entwined, this, for me.
But there's that other side as well, that women were not diagnosed because they were very good at covering it. Is that not true?
Well, you would say that, but you could also say that women in general were under so much pressure to be a certain type of person, to follow a certain role that wasn't necessarily put on men to the same degree, that how they coped and how they masked was effective because it fitted within society's roles, so that's why they didn't get taken seriously. That is a misogyny in its own thing.
Yeah, it's inbuilt. I was just going to say to Nicola, I bought 3 pairs of sunglasses this week. I mean, I'm going to say it, in a way, I hate the sun. It brings out all the things in life that kind of irritate me at times. But I just have to chill out, you know. But anyway, you know, from being bitten by bugs to responsibilities due to the growth of nature, gardening and stuff, and then the actual heat, having the correct clothing to wear, hydrating correctly, you know, all that stuff. So I had no sunglasses because the glares were really giving me kind of like almost migraines. And just getting a decent cheap pair of sunglasses these days. But I found a pair at Argos, really nice, running sunglasses. Look like Roy Orbison, which is nice. I can hide. But the experience in Sainsbury's was that they do not sell men's sunglasses. They're only in the women's section, which means they'll be a bit tight on a male head, depending on what kind of male you are, that is.
Yeah, the glares do absolutely end me. And I want to look at them when they're bouncing off things as well, because when I look at them, like there's all these colours coming off them, but then it's like I end up really like sore as well. So it's like, don't look at the pretty like reflections of all the light everywhere, but I want to. And the other thing I was going to say about what you said there was like, you know, that I just thought of another thing that's not just like a social construction of like disability connected to autism, and it's like, you know, like one of the biggest leading causes of death in autistic kids is drowning. And I know that like, you know, my kids really struggled with learning to swim and were very resistant to it as wee ones. It was really tricky, and I think I'd been sort of saying to them, like, we're going to have to get like a one-to-one coach because they wanted to go on boats and things like that, but I was like, you need to be able to swim. But my eldest just said that she could just will herself to do it, and then she just did in the shallow end, and then my youngest just followed suit. So they just stubbornly made themselves swim so that they didn't have to go and get coaching.
Swimming is a weird one. I mean, I'm very resistant to water at times. You know, even getting in and out of the shower can be hard work. And swimming from a very young age, I learned how to get off sick from swimming and end up in a wee sort of private class with all the other people who didn't like swimming. So we did amateur dramatics and other weird shit. But swimming, I mean, why should we even have to swim? You know, people think it's a natural thing. Yeah. If you're, well, maybe it's a natural thing. Maybe it isn't. I remember living in Shetland and talking to the fishermen out at the sea, and they went, being able to swim was useless if you fell in. You know, it just maybe prolonged your death, you know, to a certain extent. Or it may have helped out, you know, in your survival if given a certain set of life-saving circumstances. But I always felt the sea was a really alien place, you know, like getting into the water and swimming. And I never learned to swim. The crawl was impossible. Exhausting stuff.
I think the stimulation and swimming thing for me, I avoided it like your kids, but I managed to avoid it for a very long time. Everything from getting undressed and being cold, to going through that horrible footpath with its chemicals, to breathing the air that was appalling, to having your eyes streaming with chlorine, to the noise of all of the shouting bouncing off that reverberating echo chamber that a swimming pool is, and not being able to coordinate my limbs sufficiently before I started to sink. Everything about swimming was difficult, and it is, as we're talking about here, about a lot to do with the stimulation, the overstimulation, the too much of the environment for me to be able to cope with it. In the comments from Facebook, I was perfectly happy and okay when I had the support of my parents. I only struggled with my autism after the loss of my father. So what that person's reminding us is that we can reach an equilibrium and a sense of being okay in society as autistic people, but then sudden changes that have been supporting us can be the things that make it impossible and disable us in society. So that kind of goes to what I was saying about having the fortune to be able to be in an environment that suits you and is supporting you, and when it's taken away, that all collapses on you. But the autism itself is something you can live with and have a lovely life with.
Yeah, but then you need to get in the shower, and then there's a problem. It took me about 3 months of OT to get some sort of every second day shower situation going on. So I do agree with you mostly, but it's interesting looking at the sensory stuff and talking about it.
I used to bathe at a sink. You know, a lot of people think it's a bit improper and stuff like that, but I just used to do my bits at a sink rather than a full-blown shower.
I used to refuse showers, and the only way I would ever wash would be if it was a bath with a certain temperature and everything was perfectly... I get what you're saying there, Nicola, but we all are going to have different parts of us that affect us in, you know, bigger or smaller ways, I suppose.
I've got another wee comment there from the Facebook chat there saying, what was offered by social care was generic support which was not based on my needs. Social workers ignored my lived experience. Yeah, like I suppose I do know of a lot of autistic people who rely on their family, their parents for support, and it can, and it must be really, really hard when that's gone. And it makes me think, as like a mum, that I really want to kind of try and help my kids to foster connections with like the rest of the community so that like I'm not such a big loss. I also quite like the idea of retiring somewhere nice and warm, and like I hope they don't need me the whole time.
Well, exactly. You know, and support networks are that kind of thing. We pre-plan a lot. All through my life, I was it was almost a form of anxiety. I was pre-planning the eventuality of the loss of a support network. So it was like, so what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? And so I would be kind of prepared for the fall, as it were. Does that make sense?
It does to me, and I find it, like, personally, I find it quite relatable because I get very nervous relying on others. It doesn't work for me very well, and I feel like I would like to be able to do everything myself, and I've had to learn that no, like, I have to, like, it's better when I don't. It's much better when I don't, actually. So yeah, I understand.
Yeah, that can be a difficult one, relinquishing control of the entirety of your life. It's not like you go out and find somebody else to do it for you. It's probably just the case of like, okay, take a rest. You can't do it all. Appreciate that fact. Sit back, see what happens. And hopefully it's not what Robbie just put in the comments there, that the rest of the family abandoned him. That can tend to happen for many, many different reasons, good and bad. But if you're in need, you know, that support is required.
The next post is from Embrace-Autism, who are a mental health service, a science website, diagnostic centre. And what they say is a research-based, what they're described as is research-based information and empowerment by autistics for autistics. Embrace your advantages. And what they've shared is part of a series about discussing autism in a positive light, part 2 of 3. And what it's called is What We Experience Is Not Who We Are, and is written by Martin Silverton. It was published in September 21, but last updated in March 23. And what it says is, in my previous post, I talked about adopting a more positive outlook on autism. In this second post, I want to dive deeper into that concept, talk about some common obstacles, and briefly go into the relationship between our life experiences and our self-identity. Encompassing world. In my late 20s, I came to adopt a more positive view of myself and my autism. It's not that I no longer have any challenges, because I do, but I came to realise that I hold myself back by focusing on the negative. The interesting thing is that whatever we focus on becomes our world, if only in that moment. But focus on it perpetually, and it becomes an encompassing and enduring world. So by focusing on the negative perpetually, you will effectively live in a dark world until you can shift that mindset. Conversely, by keeping focus on the positive, you can live in a world you want to experience. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that all your struggles are in your mind, or that all your struggles will go away simply by changing your mindset. We face genuine struggles, and oftentimes our environment, or where we are psychologically and spiritually, will prevent us from changing our mindset and general experience. But despite the dark place and mindset I used to find myself in, I found ways, with help from others, to start to appreciate who I am and what I can do. And I started paying attention to those things more and more. The two wolves. The aphorism of the two wolves comes to mind, which is nicely expressed in this short dialogue. They are two wolves fighting in each man's heart. One is love, one other is hate. Which one wins? The one you feed the most. Rewiring your brain. While the time it takes to form new habits or create lasting change in the brain can vary depending on how fundamental the change is, there is evidence that suggests you can start rewiring your brain in 6 to 8 weeks. The brain's ability to modify, change, and adapt both structure and function throughout life and in response to experience is called neuroplasticity, which is governed by different processes that continue to different degrees throughout life. Some things may indeed take months or years to change, but irrespective, the more you practice one thing, the better you become at it. Focusing on my potential. And the more I focused on what I'm capable of and the awesome things I can explore with those capacities, the more pervasive and enduring, the more positive world became. Over time, it rewired my brain and changed my tendency to focus on the negative or come up with ways to counterbalance the positive things about myself and experiences. By focusing on the positive aspects of myself and my life, over time I started to experience myself and life more positively. This is why Natalie and I created Embrace Autism, to share that positive mindset and give autistic people the means to accept and appreciate themselves and start living life more fully. For more information on this journey, look at my previous post, which is called Seeing Autism in a Positive Light. Disidentify with your experience. So to reiterate, yes, I still have struggles in life, but I have found ways not to let those struggles become my life. And arguably, the hardest thing to overcome is when you have come to identify with your struggles so strongly that they seemingly become who you are. But my anxiety is something I experience. It's not who I am. And equally, the social exclusion and other traumas I endured in life are things that happened to me. It's not who I am. Despite those experiences being common amongst autistics, I do not believe that is what autism intrinsically is. But here is the risk. While the social exclusion I experienced doesn't necessarily say anything about me, I nevertheless end up identifying with that experience. I end up saying things such as, I'm an outsider, a social recluse, and alien. I believe I mentioned being an outsider in my last post even. This is something I still identify with, but the more aware I become of that, the easier it becomes to disidentify with it. Distinct from disassociate, which I think is an avoidance tactics which sustains our lack of awareness rather than promoting awareness. And the easier it becomes to acknowledge that these were just experiences I had which I shouldn't have had, rather than social exclusion happening to me as a justification act based on being autistic. You see, if I start identifying with being an outcast, then I'm effectively saying it was just one of others to socially exclude me. And the worst I can do for myself is shaping my identity around the worst things that happened to me. I think who I am more defined by how I choose to deal with those things and how I overcome the challenges I face. So what do people think about this so far?
Silvertant was one of the people who I first found when I was exploring my identity and my identification as an autistic man. I would recommend the words of Silvertant. We do not need to disable ourselves. However, it's difficult to follow the advice because so many things are ranged against following that advice. But following and looking and finding out what the two of them say, I think, is a very positive thing for listeners to this broadcast.
I'll just continue on with the post for more discussion. Autistic experience. As I talked about in Autism is Like Cake, autism is not purely genetic, neither neurological or biological. Autism also has a phenomenological aspect to it. It's a qualitative experience. And not just that, but an interpersonal and environment-dependent experience. What I mean by that part of autism can be understood only insofar as we interact with others in relation to our environment. If I live on an otherwise uninhabited island, I would still be autistic, but my autism would no longer be expressed through interaction with others. If you were to ask me what it's like to be autistic, I would have a different answer than you and I would likely have today. In fact, some of the core aspects of autism would no longer make any sense in the absence of interpersonal interaction. The greater point here is not that we have different experience of what it's like to be autistic, which we do, but there is probably an unavoidable conflation between what autism instantly like and the experience we acquire on account of being autistic, or to be more exact, on account of being different. I think there's a significant difference between the autistic experience and experiences of autistic people. The autistic experience is probably a culmination of the common experience of autistic people, but not all our experience as autistic people are necessarily autistic experiences. Taking back control. So let me end this post by emphasising that your experience of being autistic or different doesn't necessarily tell others what it's like to be autistic. And my concern is that because our society at large is not constructed specifically with autistic people in mind, we are inevitably more likely to experience interpersonal challenges, which then inform us about who we are and what autism entails. But we must be careful in equating our experiences as our autistic attributes. I'm a lot more than the experiences I have and the way society sees me. And more importantly, if we properly distinguish between who we are and what we endure, I think you will find we have more control than you might think. I have limited controls over the experiences I will have, short of changing environments and people I interact with. However, I can assert a lot more control over my interpretations of my experiences, how I process the emotions that come up in response to those experiences, what I end up internalizing and associating with who I am or think I am, and with who and what I choose to identify. It's not necessarily an easy task to take back that control. I have, on and off, been practicing this for years, but I find my life has improved a lot. I feel more aware and I feel more in control. And when basic bodily and ego needs have been fulfilled, we can start focusing on self-actualization, to no longer define ourselves in terms of our worst experiences, but to instead become our potentialities. What's other people's thoughts after the conclusion of that article?
Well, it's quite deep, in a way. So there's almost too much to say about it. I can't focus on anything in particular. Just going over that last paragraph, in a sense, because earlier Nicola had mentioned self-actualization and definitions and identifications and all that. I like that word potentialities at the end, because there's a word I use a lot, subjunctive, and it means to be open to possibilities. It's a literary term, the subjunctive mode. It's to act as if, in a sense, to be open to that, rather than to have what they call indicative, fixed ideas about things. But I'll leave it at that because it's so deep, I'll get even deeper.
You are allowed to do that if you want to, but only if you want to, Raymond.
I just want to encourage people to go to Embrace Autism as a website. Eva, I think I may have dead named Eva earlier, is somebody who's written about all kinds of different things, trans identity, asexuality, some of the things that are in detail that other advocates don't necessarily cover. There's a wealth of information that she's put together, or they've put together.
I was going to say, why is this not generally available? And you're almost answering that question there, Jules, by pointing us to the website. They've made it available. There are people out there thinking like this who've had experience and have ways of channeling that for anyone to encounter and work on and work with. So more power to them.
And it's free. If you are just identifying as autistic at the moment and you want to deep dive, this is a free resource.
What I like about reading through that, as I did just there, it's like taking things more positively, but it's not in a patronising way. And it does say, that there's no quick fix to anything, but there's a positive ways forward if you choose to go that way. And there's ways of, there's options out there, and there's alternatives out there. Because it is right, people do feel defined by their experiences, especially if the experience, is very negative. Because it feels that we live in a very negative world, and negative things happening is big news and something to talk about and something to mull over. And there's not enough good news and positivity out there in general anyway. So it's no wonder how so many people get caught up in the negative experiences, and they feel that it makes them, and that's their identity. At least temporarily, if not permanent.
I think the other resource that we've talked about in the past is people finding autism tests. And one of the pages on Natalie and Eva's website has the majority of the tests that I've come across, the AQ10, the AQ, the EQ, the SQ, the RADSAR, the ASPE quiz, and the CATQ. So for people who are interested in exploring identity, there's a real reference just to have those tests. Somebody in the private text has written that, how do we feel about rewiring our brains? Well, that's a difficult one. It really depends if the rewiring comes from outside, because ABA is about rewiring brains. ABA is about training people, and that's not got a good record historically. But what was written in that piece that Harry was bringing our attention to was that the brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity means that we are rewiring our brains constantly, and our brains are rewired by our experience to trauma. They're rewired by our experience to pleasure. They're rewired by all of our experiences as we go through life. We are an accumulation of our experience. So if we consciously think to reduce the amount of ways that negative wiring can happen without our permission, and are more conscious about how we think, it's a way of taking control for ourselves and not being the result of negative things in our lives. We can positively take control.
Somebody's asked, is it positive thinking? And to me, in my experience of this, because I did really want to rewire my brain, you know, I really did want to, and I have, I've made some big changes, and I've seen that kind of change my outer life as well. And it's I would say positive thinking, that sounds just I feel yucky when I even say it. It's empowered thinking. It's about empowerment, and about I had to learn that I could give myself the same respect that I would give another person. So when I realized that a wee voice inside my head was just saying the same sort of stuff to me that some of the most destructive people in my life had, that's when I was I don't want to, that's not what I want to hear. So I would just say it's positive thinking. It is like Jules was expressing there, that it's taking control of as much of what you can, and what is yours. And if that's sort of challenging my negative voice when it's just criticizing and ripping into me, speaking to it the way that I would speak to somebody who was speaking to my friends like that, or speaking to somebody another person like that. So it's, I don't know, it's just, yeah, I don't know what the words are beyond that.
The dogs are joining in today. What happened to the wee positive voice in you? Have you ever heard that one? You know, that it's like the angel and the devil on either shoulder, you know?
I think the positive voice is tended to, I don't know, there's an awful lot more to it than I'm comfortable getting into, to be honest. But
no, I respect that.
Yeah, suffice to say that, you know, it has been about deciding how I'm going to think about myself, and you know, aligning the way that I treat myself with my with my politics as well, with like what I believe is like right for people, and like yeah, I think what we read in the shared post as well. We can take control of that, and it's a worthy pursuit.
I would like to think of a simple thing. We often say to ourselves, "Oh, I'm an idiot." You know, when we make a mistake, we often actually say out loud, "I'm an idiot." And as soon as I hear myself saying that now, I'm getting into the habit of saying, "No, you're not an idiot. You made a mistake. We can deal with this." And I constantly catch myself whenever I say things that are negative, or if I'm in a social situation and I think the easiest way of getting around it is by self-deprecation, to say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't blah, blah, blah," I stop myself from doing it. I am much more willing to try to end up coming across as arrogant than as somebody who feels like they have, who seems like they have less self-worth. And I think the trade-off is better for me to catch myself from putting myself down in any way, or telling myself that I'm daft or silly or shouldn't have done something, and changing and turning it around immediately. And it has an immediate effect on you. I've seen people who have got themselves into such a groove that the whole of their life is negative, and it compounds itself. You're complicit in how you've been beaten in the past by a person or a society or a parent or a partner, or it's really difficult to escape from that. However, as soon as you can make those tiny little steps that move you away from accepting what somebody has done to you, you can gradually break through. You can gradually take out another brick in that wall to your own self-esteem.
I use a very similar process myself, and I really have noticed I don't get so depressed as a result, and I think that it helps. It's like it helps to resource myself much better. And what you said about, like, you know, when you can get right into that really negative place for periods of time when your self-esteem's, for myself, my self-esteem was in such a place that I wouldn't maybe make the best decisions in terms of, like, even company. I would accept company from people who didn't have my best interests at heart, because I felt so low about myself, and that was such a change. And I've seen somebody in the private chat saying that, you know, they don't, how I think about myself reflects how people treat me. I don't feel valued because I am excluded from society, so I don't value myself. But the empowering way to flip it is to not reject yourself in that, and to not, like the posts that we're discussing, saying it's not going down the rejection route. It's looking at, it's like looking at what connection is there. It's all of that self-nurturing resource stuff.
And there's a comment in the comments over on Facebook. When you are punished by exclusion for having autistic meltdowns, it's difficult then to value yourself. And autistic meltdowns in the past were, in children, they were treated as though they were tantrums. I remember the word tantrum from my own childhood. Not too badly. I had autistic parents, so they managed reasonably with me. But there's something about that. We've had programs on television here in the UK, like the Super Nanny, where a child is obviously in need and having a tantrum, having a meltdown, having whatever word you want to call it. And the answer to that was to tell them to be excluded and go and sit on the naughty step, to be, instead of being loved and cared for and looked after, they were to be excluded and punished. And this isn't okay. This isn't good parenting. We shouldn't be excluded for expressing our difficulties. Our difficulties is a meltdown where it could be violence. As I'm an autistic man now, my meltdown might look much more violent than a child. But restraining and excluding and holding us away or holding us down or putting us into solitary is not dealing with the need of the human, of the person.
Yes, I can identify with that. I mean, the positive thinking or empowerment thinking, that what I tend to do is if I've been through a hard time or something came up, and a lot of things do, I sort of kind of mull on it, and it's bad to have over mulling it and over analysing it and forensically, all that kind of stuff. But what I do like about myself and what I've taught myself to do is that I come to a positive, as much positive conclusion as you can, and then kind of self-say, talking to myself, saying, stop beating yourself up over it. You did your best, It's this sort of positive, is this, and then this sort of defiance, is this will not get out, this will not drag me down, this will not ruin my day, this will not define me, this will not knock me back. And even if something does knock me back, if something's that powerful and that, it just hits me and it gets us down, I always make sure I've got a plan that I'll come back and that I'll feel that I've learned from that experience. Some are harder to do it, others, of course, but I just like reading kind of language that can rewire in the brain. The kind of positive language is always needed when it comes to, experiences that people can have that are very traumatic and very impactful in a negative way, and trying to turn that around into a positive and not let something grind you down. Because it seems like for everyone, is that the way that life seems to be in many societies is that it's a grinder that looks to grind you down, and you always seem to be fighting in survival mode all the time, and it does become tiresome, it does become a burden. But the way I look at it in many ways, I enjoy fighting the good fight, but also being reasonable and fighting the good fight, and that's what keeps me getting up in the morning. The next post is from Trauma Geek Janie Elizabeth. Community page. Janie Elizabeth, aka Trauma Geek, is a researcher, storyteller, and University. Janie Elizabeth, aka Trauma Geek, is a researcher, storyteller, and neurodiversity advocate. They. Janie shares current science, personal insights, and stories from the journey as an autistic survivor. Actually, autistic trauma is my special interest. And what they've shared is a quote. Stop asking if research validates lived experience. Start asking if lived experience validates research. What's people's thoughts on that quote?
I don't feel smart enough for this tonight. Wait.
We're getting deep ones tonight, aren't we? I like their posts because she takes no shit in a nice way. But I'll leave this for others to digest.
The reason it was shared is because there's always been discussions in the past and concerns in the past that certain research doesn't seem to take on board the lived experience as expertise from different individuals. It becomes very scientific, very statistics based, very dry, very patronising, basically it doesn't feel human, very robotic. And what I'm taking from that quote is lived experience should validate research, but it depends if research is done in the right way. But many people have different opinions on how things and how research and how things can be perceived and handled in the right way, because the right way for some people is different from others' perspectives.
I think so much research, especially research that's to do with the behaviourist group. There's a whole set of behavioural science. It's not just about ABA. It's about everything to do with the human experience. Behavioural science. We just know it as ABA, but behavioural science is underpinning politics. It underpins sales. It underpins crowd theories. Behavioural science is essentially any science, any social science that looks at the human experience in a scientific way rather than a poetic way. And so often the research I see that is aimed to be relevant to autism does not feel relevant to my lived experience. It feels as though they haven't started in the right place. They've started investigating the wrong thing. And all the way through the research, it looks as though some of the interpretations they put on autistic people's behaviours or what they find doesn't fit with my understanding of how it is to be an autistic person. So it seems flawed all the way through, even before they make their conclusions. So when this meme says, stop asking if research validates our lived experience, it's saying that if your question is to wonder whether what you have found in your research is actually relevant to the autistic experience, you've started in the wrong place. What you should have been doing was start with the lived experience to validate the need for your research. So if you start with the observation, the basic part of science, which has always been observation before you make up your theory, before you test your theory, before then you get a result for your theory and a conclusion for your theory. What it appears to the autistic population a lot of the time is that we are not being observed, so it doesn't start from us.
That makes perfect sense now.
Thanks for that, Jules. And yeah, and it made a bit of sense of, like, I did participate in some research recently, but only because the researcher was autistic herself. And when I've had invitations to participate before, I've just not wanted to, because it wasn't clear who the researchers were, and I just didn't feel comfortable at all. And there's, I know in the other chat there, the commenter saying the first question to ask about research is who is funding it?
Yes, that's a very good point. Because who's funding the research is why it's being done in the first place. What's the intentions behind it? What's it looking to say, or what's it looking to prove or disprove? Or was it looking to influence? So that's a very good comment, a very good point.
And everybody these days goes on about do the research. You know, I have to ask the question after all that, is lived experience itself research?
Wow, that is deep. Yes, experience and lived experience is research. It's research absolutely from the heart.
I did a wee course at uni about research and looking at different kinds of research. And yeah, absolutely. Even on that course, they were recognising that that is research, what we do by just observing and sharing our experience with one another is a kind of research, word of mouth.
Does it mean to search again? Possibly being a bit pedantic there.
Jules?
I haven't got a clue. But it's a nice way of thinking about it, isn't it? You know, research, maybe.
Yeah, like what did I not see the first time?
Yeah, it's like continue the look. Don't just take it at face. Research it. Look again. Yeah, maybe, yes. But I don't know whether that's the etymology of it. I just think that it's a good way of thinking about it. There is something here. Just because a researcher's autistic themselves doesn't mean that they're not going to take advantage of the autistic population. I have recently refused to take part in the autism and dementia research that has been going on for a long time, that we've been cooperating with for a long time. But I personally am no longer willing to take part in it because there wasn't reciprocation. You know, the researcher themselves had an opportunity to, in another way, to produce co-production, and they excluded us from that. So I no longer trusted them in their research that they were actually going to be one of the researchers who did use the autistic experience in a valid and fair way. Researchers can be masking themselves and copying the ways of other researchers around them. They don't suddenly become angels because they realise they're autistic halfway through their PhD.
Yeah, it's like a priest or religious person saying, I have the word, the authoritative word.
So very true.
Yeah, that's a good point that Jules did make. It feels an advantage sometimes when someone who's autistic or claims to be autistic that are just doing research, just doing kind of work, but it all depends on what their perception of what the work they're going to do and how they're going to use their so-called position or authority or power in that research or in that project or in that opportunity. Because there's many people that are autistic that are not intending to do good things. Autistic people are human, they're fallible, and some of them can be very negative and have no intention of helping others. I mean, we're not naive to think that every autistic person is good. It's not nice saying that, but it's true. Final post I'll do tonight, quite quickly, is from Brain Power Neurodevelopmental Centre, who are a mental health service who offers assessment services for autism, ADHD, and neurodevelopmental disorders for Indiana, Kentucky, Illinois, and the US. And what they've shared is they say the last 100 years have witnessed a remarkable evolution in our understanding and treatment of autism. From its initial diagnosis in the early 20th century to the present day, the journey has been one of the most significant discovery, challenges, and progress. Initially misunderstood and stigmatized, autism is now recognized as a spectrum of conditions, each with its own unique set of characteristics and challenges. What's people's thoughts on that final post?
I'm going to rush in and I'm going to say there are no experts on autism. There are no lived experience experts on autism. The word expert is not valid because autism, as we can see from this timeline, is completely open at the moment for definition by all these different groups. So I want everybody who works in autism, whether they are neurodivergent themselves or whether they are a researcher who's been working for a while or a professional, to have the humility to realise that a lot of what they believe right now will change in a few months, a few years' time.
Here. That's why I think a lot of it is narrative and is almost poetic. And it's reflecting slightly on what you said in the earlier post about the difference between science or a scientific view of the world and research and a poetic view of the world. Sometimes I think we have to take a poetic view or frame for our understanding.
Emergent, that feels like a word that I wanted to put in a sentence based on what you were saying there, Raymond. It feels like, yeah.
That's a good word, emergent, that came up recently, and it is imbued with possibilities and openness and fluidity, which, yeah.
A seed sprouts and it's emergent when it comes out of the soil and lifts itself up to the sun.
Growing.
Well, thank you everyone. That was a great discussion tonight, as always. We've come to the end of the broadcast. So thanks for everyone who's taken part this evening, and thanks to everyone who shared those posts that we discussed. It created a great discussion on many different topics, and it was appreciated and it was indulged well. So this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday the 13th of April 2025, which is part of the Spectrum Voices podcast on the broadcast every Sunday, 5:55 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. UK time. And I look forward to next week is when we do another batch of posts. So thank you for listening. Now I'll hand over to Jules.
Thank you, Harry. To start the evening, we're going to look at the work of Autistic Association that makes Autistic Radio possible. I have a few things to say. Blah, 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 blah.